Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 5. This week, you are working primarily on your revisions for the literacy narrative. So let's take a look at the overview and the readings for this week. You'll see that I have a lecture that's only about 11 minutes, just some thoughts on revision and reflections on some of the readings here. This week, I have chosen readings from chapter 4. I was going to choose some other stories, literacy narrative stories from chapter 5, but I figured it would probably be better to focus the readings on revision and getting you to think more deeply about revision. So the first one we have there is Shitty First Drafts by Anne Lamott. And I love assigning this to students because it's, first of all, I mean, the title itself is just like, oh, well, I have to read this, right? So this is from her book, Bird by Bird, which was written in 1994. And it's just a really great piece because she's very, very humorous, but she's also very open about her own struggles with writing. So, you know, it's really such a great piece to introduce to students because it's very accessible, it's very relatable. So I hope you enjoy reading this. The second one I've chosen is from Nancy Summers. And this piece was written in 1980. So you have to keep that in mind. It's revision strategies of student writers and experienced adult writers. And she did this study in the 70s and early 80s, I think. Well, I guess late 70s. So she did this study that kind of compared the revision processes of novice or student writers and compared it with how more adult experienced writers tend to approach revision. So keep in mind when you're reading this that at the time of that study, people were not composing on computers or word processors. Some may have had typewriters at their disposal, but most people were composing in with paper and pen, which means revision was approached a lot differently than how we approach revision today. So just keep in mind that the writing process and revision process was much different than what we're experienced with today. I'm sure there's still some of you who like to compose paper and pen, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Whatever process you choose and works for you, that's fantastic. But in the end, we usually do compose, or at least, you know, have the final product in a computer, and it's a digital thing, right? So that's one difference, one major difference, but it's still a relevant piece for you to read and to get some ideas about revision. So those are the selections from the text. You don't want to see that screen. I also have a recommended reading if you have time and interest. I suggest reading this piece called Learning the Uses of Chaos from Anne Berthoff. Berthoff is probably one of my favorite scholars on composition. She's just really great, and I love what she says in this piece. That's from her book, The Making of Meaning, which was also published in 1980. So even though these some of these readings are from a long time ago, over 40 years ago, they still are really relevant, and they have some really interesting points that I'd like you to think about as writers. So those are the readings, the to-do list. Watch the overview, which I'm recording now and will be posted above. Watch this short lecture, and then you have peer review that's due on the 10th. That's Thursday the 10th. And then we have the literacy narrative final revision, which was originally going to be due on the 13th, but I've actually extended the date for submission to Tuesday the 15th, primarily because the Bengals are in the Super Bowl, and I know many of you will want to spend time watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, perhaps partying, and might need Monday to recover. So we won't have that due until the 15th. You are, of course, welcome to submit early. I will be unlocking the unit a little bit earlier than I normally do. So yeah, you're welcome. So let's move on next. Here is the PDF for that piece from Ann Berthoff. I apologize that this is not a completely accessible PDF. It is a scan from the book. I do own the book, but you'll see it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And she's a very accessible writer as well. So I think this is a good piece to recommend for those of you who might be interested in how we create meaning and what we can do with revision to make meaning even more clear. There is an alternative format and this links to archive.org. I believe you might have to create an account, but it's a free account, so no problem there if you need it. I do try to make things as accessible as possible and try to provide you with alternative formats. But if you come up here and you click on library reference, there is the link to archive.org. And once you get to archive.org, even though it's also a scanned image, they do have the option of a text reader so that you can use that if you have some visual impairment that makes reading these documents difficult. Okay, so the next thing up is the rough draft peer review. You will be assigned one peer whose paper I want you to review. This page is just the instructional page of how to go about doing a peer review. You can either watch the Canvas tutorial, which is roughly, I don't know, I think it's about 5 minutes. And that walks you through how to do peer review, where to find it. If you've not done this before, then you can watch that video. There's also just text instructions with images where you can find it and how you can do a peer review. Remember, you can provide feedback in or any combination in one or any combination of ways. I need to proofread that and fix it. You can do that by using the rubric with the comments, and I'll show you the rubric in a minute. You can also provide feedback within the document, and you can also leave feedback in the add a comment section that's right here. So you can use one or any combination of ways. So those are the instructions. The next page is the actual peer review questions that I want you to take a look at. So again, this just is the rationale for doing peer review. Reminder that you're not grading or looking for mechanical errors. You don't have to correct anything. Instead, I want you to help your classmate by encouraging them to do their best work. And you might also want to point out what's especially good about their writing. So the instructions, again, from the previous page, you can watch the tutorial, access your peers draft, and then read carefully and provide feedback through one of the methods presented in the video. Remember to give constructive feedback, pointing out both the strengths and weaknesses of your peers' writing. And then there's a list of 10 questions, things to look at: formatting, page and word count, heading, header, that kind of thing. Is it logically organized? Does each paragraph examine one main idea? Does the essay address one of the topics that's related to the literacy narrative? Does the title grab your interest? Why? Does it suggest the essay's topic? How does the opening hook the audience? Is there an interesting opening sentence? How might the opening improve to grab the audience's interest? Is there background information? Is there a thesis statement? Do body paragraphs provide deeper analysis? Does your peer use an appropriate tone? Does your peer need to focus on deeper revision? You could also download those questions with this PDF if you want to. And then lastly, oh, no, not lastly, lastly for revision anyway, there's a page on some revision strategies. I'm not going to talk through all of these. You can read them for yourselves, but if you're just kind of stymied on how to go about revising, there are some things that these are some strategies that can be really helpful. There's a new one down here that is from the Write or Die Tribe website called Marie Kondo. I think this one is kind of cool. If you're familiar with the Japanese organizing expert Marie Kondo, she picks up an item, you know, she's all for minimalism. Pick up an item, does it spark joy? If it does, you keep it. If not, you dispose of it. So similarly, you can do this with your draft. Choose a sentence in each paragraph that doesn't spark joy and strike through the sentence and then reread to see if cutting that sentence affects your meaning. If skipping the sentence has no negative effects on the paragraph, then you might want to consider cutting it for your revised draft. And this works really well if you've written a draft that's longer than the minimum required word count. So if you tend to just kind of ramble on, this might be a very good strategy for you to use in your revision. So, and there's also, do I have that posted for you? I may not have the revision in, oh, I do. Okay. So again, revisioning and editing checklist is another thing that you can take a look at. Next is the assignment page for the literacy narrative final revision. This is exactly the same wording from the rough draft. Just remember to keep in mind the length is 5 to 6 double-spaced 12-point font pages. If you use outside sources, which are not required, but if you use outside sources or you use, which by outside sources, I just mean something from outside of your own head. So the text or website, anything that we've taken a look at up to this point in this course would be considered an outside source. So if you use something, if you quote from something or you relate to one of the readings, you'll need to cite it and include that in a works cited or bibliography page. Remember, you can use whatever style formatting that you want to. If you're more comfortable with APA, go ahead and use APA. I'm more familiar with MLA. So if you want to do MLA, that's fine too, or Chicago. Whichever one you think is most applicable and easiest for you. So I think that's it. Oh, I want to take a look at the rubric for you. So there is a rubric, 20 points for each of the 5 areas dealing with the introduction, literacy narrative that illustrates a threshold concept. Writing is impacted by identity and prior experiences. Using support for your main point, using your specific stories. You don't have to take from other sources, but you must have some kind of specific stories from your own literacy history. And bring in any chapter readings that might support your argument. And then, of course, organization is something that I will be looking at, as well as conclusion. So the areas of criteria here, it either exceeds expectations, meets expectations, nearly meets expectations, or falls below expectations. So that's the rubric there. So you should be familiar with that because it's the same rubric. I just didn't have any points attached to the rubric for the rough draft. And that is the end of the module there. So best of luck with your revisions. If you have questions or if anything comes up and you need some extra time, please send me an email. I'm happy to extend deadlines for you. I know that things can be kind of crazy, but you know, I have given you a couple of extra days, so hopefully those will be enough and you won't need extra days. But if you do, please reach out to me and I'm happy to be flexible about those deadlines. All right, take care. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.